Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. We're back for part two of our discussion of the offense from that big win in the first preseason game. Joining me again is Nik Mehta. Nick, how you doing?
Doing great, Ken. I think that it's so interesting to have so many different young players to talk about in offense in a way it really hasn't felt like the Ravens have had before. They're, in every different position group, there's two or three young players to really highlight and see what they brought out of the preseason and talking about what they can bring right away. Not just, oh, what can this guy develop into become later down the line? We're talking about potential starting center for the 2026 Ravens. And as sometimes can be a little worrying. But in that example, but the wide receiver position, the tight end position, just a lot of excitement there.
Yeah, it's interesting because the in the in the center competition, this is honestly one of the problems, is all three of those guys are older players. So including Gwyn, even though he's only got 11 career snaps, he's a fourth-year player, and the Ravens will lose him potentially to free agency at the end of the year. After this game, by the way, we're going to talk about him in just a second. I'm that's probably my biggest concern right now with Gwyn is the Ravens are going to lose him at the end of the year.
I think you might be getting a little ahead of yourself, Ken, but
Could possibly be. One thing we want to talk about was the exotic looks in what happened in this game and talk about what coaches do during the preseason. There was very, very little on offense. And just to give a few high-level notes, they had played no pony backfield at all, so nothing with two running backs. They had 80 snaps, 80 single running backs. They had no OL6 the entire game. They could have done that. They had 1.44 tight ends per play. That includes Scott in there, who's listed as a fullback, but he's a tight end. And they had 2.56 wide receivers per play, which is slightly up from last year's preseason and probably could be up more during the regular season. Obviously, not using a fullback means you're going to use less heavies, and they have to go somewhere. So you either have to go to wide receiver or tight end or to OL6.
yeah, this was nothing surprising to me. I think even it's the Ravens haven't really didn't feature an OL6 very much last year. They did a lot more in 2024.
Mm-hmm.
Really don't think it's something that we've seen in either of the past two, maybe even the past three training camps. Just not something that you see them put out there on the practice field. And the coaches talk about this. They don't want to give away what they're doing. I think Doyle, especially coming in first time coordinator, his first full time play calling gig. Not wanting to put too much out there on film for other folks to see, other teams to see. But then, of course, there's just the fact that these are also a lot of younger players. And so there's an extent to which you do want to simplify things for them and allow their skill sets to shine a little bit more than giving them things that are too complicated. I think this is, what you're describing, no pony, and just the kind of simplicity of the approach in general is probably one of the reasons why the offensive operation was so clean at the line of scrimmage.
I'd buy that you're using very familiar formations and stuff. If I were to give one other reason why they never get away from standard plays, that's more apparent on defense why they would do this is they have a set number of players they need to look at, and those position groups are largely filled up in line with kind of more standard formations, 12 and 11 primarily. So you have enough tight ends. You want to see a certain amount of 12, and you can afford to see a certain amount of 11 to see all your wide receivers get to play too. So you need to do that. One running back is usually enough to get everybody enough playing time. If you put an OL6 on the field, then that's taking away from one of those other positions. And so they don't tend to do that. And that works on defense too. In this game, they played 100% base and nickel. They did very little with the pass rush that was surprising. They rushed 4 or 5 every single play, and they did some blitzes, some stunts, and some simulated pressure. And there's a little bit of rotation and whatnot. There's actually some good video about that on Not Now, but they did very, very little that was of a giving away the playbook nature in this game for the defense. And that's exactly what they did last year, by the way, too, under Harbaugh. So it's a fairly well league-wide thing.
Yeah, it's that's all standard. Every other team can pull up all of your preseason tape and go to work figuring things out. And the goal is to not give them anything to see.
Yeah. Yeah, very much true. All right, well, let's move on. I did score 3 offensive linemen. I want to talk about them two of them at a very brief, high level. Get your thoughts on the play of them. But Carson Vincent had a fairly good game. He, ended up allowing 6 different pressure events that he was a part of. It was a third of a quarterback hit, which is a -1, and 5 pressures. He only missed 2 blocks, which was nice in a 62 scored plays. I think he might have had 66 snaps in total if you look at the game book or something. But one of the snaps was lost to video, by the way. The video, the crappy preseason broadcast of the game, just they weren't on the field when they needed to be. And, I lose a play of offensive line. I did get to see who caught the football at the end of the play. I just got to see the tackle being made, but I didn't get to see the offensive line play on that snap. I'm not bitter at all, though. So I just want
Cameraman, keep your identity a secret.
Yeah.
Ken better not find out who you are.
So anyway, Vincent, I thought his problems were as a pass blocker, not as a run blocker, which was nice. I thought he was actually really effective there. But he's going to make it or break it in this league as a pass blocker, and a C with adjustment for him, just at a very high level. I'm not going to go into all the things. If you want more detail on what who Carson missed against, it's all out there in the offensive article.
Can I ask you one question, Ken? Did you felt like he had a lot of slower wins, or his wins were quicker? Or losses. Was he losing slowly?
Yeah.
Or was he losing quickly? Because it didn't feel like he had a lot of times where he was just beat completely off the snap. So that's always something I'm looking for in the alignment.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, by the way. I think he had more slow death wins, and those would play very well with Lamar Jackson. It's something with Roddy Stanley's always been good at. Yeah, I thought you might be getting at that. So, anyway, not a bad game at all from Carson. And I came into this preseason thinking he was not going to get a lot of snaps. Now the tackle situation says, yeah, he's going to get a lot of snaps because they can't afford to sit him. They need to get through the preseason. But he could come close again to leading the league. Lichtenhand might actually lead the league in snaps this year based on what we've seen so far. But Carson Vincent was right up there within a snap or two of the entire league lead last year, and looks like he could get a lot of snaps again.
Yeah, the Ravens, I think, really they really liked Vincent. And it's interesting, he's a carryover from Warhop, and it almost felt like times, I think you noted this a couple times, he almost felt like Warhop's pet project a little bit last year. And to see him carry over, and obviously there's a lot that Ledford has to offer him. Ledford's done a great job in Atlanta with those tackles, Jake Matthews and Caleb McGarry, done a great job with them for many years. I've always thought that's one of the more underrated tackle duos in the NFL. And Vincent has all of the physical and athletic traits that you need. It really is just a matter of a young guy getting playing time. So I actually was expecting him to play maybe not lead the NFL in snaps necessarily, but I was expecting him to get a lot of burn in these games, just because the Ravens are hoping that he doesn't have to get that much run in the regular season. Obviously, with Roddy Stanley, there's always somewhat of a risk there. But otherwise, these are really, really crucial developmental snaps for him to get.
I agree with that. I kind of am of a mind that balancing that between availability during the season, which is critical for Vincent, that is important. Okay, let's move on. We'll talk about Emory Jones a little bit. He really struggled throughout the night. The score is an F. The grade is an F. Sorry. Look out on online. He did not miss a D by too much. He was about 4 points short of a D for what it's worth. It does matter because the F range is very broad relative to other grade levels. But started with the very first series. He had 3 consecutive plays where he was involved in a pass rush event. I'll let you look that up if you like. And he struggled on the left side. He was very good on the right side. So once he moved over there, he played a lot better.
Yeah, I think he got beat by Ty Robinson, prospect I really liked last year. I'll just get that out there on the record. I also thought, and I could be wrong here, Ken, I thought he got beat once by and now I'm blanking on the young man's name, the
Ramirez?
Eagles, the defensive tackle from, I forget which country in Africa, not Joshua Weir, the other, UR Bernard. I thought that he bowled over Emory Jones on one rep too. Maybe it might have even been the snap that you missed. But I thought I caught that as well. And that was just an example of absolutely freakish size and speed against, a guy who size and explosiveness against Jones, who is a, stout guy. He's got that pear-shaped guard build, as you like to say. But he just got bowled over by a guy playing what was maybe his first, second, third, professional football snap, high level football snap, not even kind of college. That was a tough look. If I'm remembering that correctly, but other than that, like you said, played a lot better on the right side. I think that just lends credence to the idea that, sometimes players, offensive linemen, are just better on one side or the other.
He did have a couple of misses on that first series, and 3 in total at left tackle. I'm blanking on the snap here, and I have the names, of course, of who he was up against in the article, and I'm not matching on that. So Bernard, you say? I'll take a look
Yeah,
back.
you are Bernard. Could have been snap you missed. I could have been, could have been 61, 51 pounds, Jones kind of situation, any number of things. But I thought I remembered seeing that. And that was just, wow, this is Emory Jones, who's got 3 years of SEC ball from the age of 19 years old. And he's in the NFL in his third year now. And he just got demolished by a guy who put on pads for the first time last week. So not the best look, if I'm remembering that correctly, and apologies if I don't.
It could well be, you're right, and it could have been lots of reasons. But anyway, information on Jones is out in the article if you want that. Not a game he's going to be showing to his grandkids. But Jovaughn Gwyn was the offensive line star of this game, and by a wide margin. Outstanding performance. Only had one negative event the entire game, and that was he and Jones together on a double team trying to stop Blay, and they gave up a half pressure to him. He pushed them both back. I wouldn't say easily, but for a half of pressure. He missed only 3 blocks. Only one of those was a loss at the line of scrimmage. He had another play where I think he tripped entering level 2, another one where he missed a block in level 2. He had 6 blocks in level 2, so that's a good connection rate, by the way, once he got there. Delivered 4 pancakes. Okay, first of all, for starters, when's the last time a Ravens center has delivered 4 pancakes in a game? They just haven't anybody with that kind of physicality. That takes at least 2 things. One is you got a guy who can actually handle that kind of physicality and probably plays with good technique in level 2 and isn't lungy to deliver some pancakes. The second part is you got an offensive line coach who wants to see
that. I think we saw on Saturday night why Dwayne Ledford brought Jovaughn Gwyn with him from Atlanta. And you can go deeper into the psychological elements of the confidence that can give a guy like Gwyn when Ledford tells him, hey, come on, we got a center competition and I'm throwing you in there. But man, his ability to get to level 2, I thought was really just exceptional. And seeing that want to, that finish, really, and again, we were talking, first part of this podcast, pass protection, more important. It's really what I'm weighting this center competition on. But again, from kind of like that visceral level was, my goodness, this guy was shot out of a cannon on some of these plays, getting upfield and hunting down these poor linebackers who really just, I'm not even sure they knew what they were in for when he came out on the field, because he surprised me.
One play to look at, and all of us probably this week have seen Broderick Washington get embarrassed by Willie Lampkin from this game. It's kind of the Eagles highlight from the game. It's that block.
The only.
Yeah. There really isn't much else. There's some plays from Peyton. I don't want to minimize the thing. But anyway, the play in this game that Gwyn has highlighted, I'm not sure why this isn't all over the internet right now. Look at Q2 344. And it's a 9-yard run off right tackle, right guard off that area. And he combos up to level 2. And he has in his sights Smile Mondon. Now, Smile Mondon was a linebacker that you'll remember his name from the draft a couple of years because it looks kind of like Smale, but it's pronounced Smile. And he was on a lot of people's list of the top 10 and whatnot of guys that were draftable. And not a slouch, played at Georgia in the SEC. And Gwyn moved up to level 2. And first he hit him and he was connected to him. And then as he was passed, he throws him to the ground. I mean, it almost looked like holding or something, but he just ragdolled him to the ground in a way you just don't see a center do. And, I was just standing up and cheering at that, not at that moment, but on the moment I saw it on TV when I got home. I was very excited about it.
Yeah, that's just not the kind of thing we've seen from Tyler Linderbaum or really any Ravens center dating back to Ryan Jensen, maybe is the last guy who I can think of who brought that kind of an edge. And what you like to see in Gwyn is that it's not just uncontrolled aggression. It really felt like he was on top of his technique at all times. There were never any times where he was like out over his skis and off balance. We've seen a lot of players who are like, oh, like this guy can get to level 2. Yeah, he can get to level 2. Can he make the hit in level 2? And so, as
Right.
you pointed out, 6 blocks in level 2, and 4 of those being pancakes. Just a phenomenal result for a guy who has been kind of talked about, but he really, really arrived on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there was almost no tape of Jovaughn Gwyn to look at before this. Now
Mm-hmm.
we've literally sextupled, hextupled, whatever it is, the multiplying it by 6, the amount of total tape we have to watch with the 11 snaps before and another, 54 in this one, 51, 51, 51, whatever it was. In this one to look at, we've got a lot more video of it, and most of it's this remarkable stuff. What I saw hand placement was outstanding. I thought he was very violent. I love guys who can position their feet, and in particular, when you're a center or a guard, the right guard probably has the greatest responsibilities in terms of opening the front gate on run plays. But in a zone system, it could be anywhere that a guy is creating the cutback lane for it. And Gwyn looks like he really has the part. I got to say, one thing I was concerned about was I thought Ledford picked a guy. I think this is true of Pinter, and I think it's maybe even more true of Gwyn, who was a scheme fit. I thought it was more true of Gwyn. But watching Gwyn play, that's not just about scheme fit. There's a hell of a lot of talent here in terms of what this guy brings to the table. So I'm more excited about it. And I actually marginally relieved that Ledford didn't bring a guy that was just a scheme fit, with him. That would have been much more concerning in terms of a broad set of things he might do with the offensive line.
No, he just brought one of his guys, and I know that we're going to get a little bit more into the coaching staff later. One thing about Gwyn that I did want to mention, I think this was during the first part of the show you mentioned it, so I'll bring him up again. This was not a case where the Eagles were playing their starting defensive tackles or their number 2, 3 guys for the first 2 series and then sitting them. They really rotated all these guys throughout the game, and so he's getting Ty Robinson, a number of times throughout this game, and that's not an easy matchup. That's a prospect who I liked a lot. Really good coaching in Philadelphia. They've done a good job of coaching up their defensive tackles there. And so this wasn't a case of a guy getting a lot of easy reps against, third, fourth string practice squad players either.
Yeah, they sat out 3 big guys for the game. They sat out Ajamo, they sat out Carter, and they started out Davis. And those are 3 terrific football players. But like the Ravens, who have terrific football players at the top of their defensive tackle and nose tackle depth chart, the Eagles also have a bunch of good backups as well. And they got to play in this game and take out their anger and frustration with being number 2s and 3s in camp on the Ravens offensive linemen. And it is a good set of players. And I had actually reported incorrectly that I thought there were changes. But anyway, I was wrong about that. There's definitely, it was the same guys rotating throughout the game. Anyway, at this point, let's put a capstone on this Gwyn discussion here for a second. I see this as vaulting him into the lead of the center competition. Is it possible that I'm just completely wrong about that?
You see this as vaulting in. What do you mean by that? Do you mean that the Ravens will vault Gwyn into the top of the center competition, or is he the player you believe should be number 1 at the competition?
Well, I mean, first of all, if he's the player I believe, then there wouldn't be any question over the thing, because my belief you can't dispute with me. I'm the only one who gets to choose that. But I think that he should be number 1, and I think the Ravens are going to have a very hard time explaining it if they don't elevate his responsibility level, which we kind of talked about in the first show. But he's got to get something more after a performance like this, whether it means, he starts the next game, or whether it means he plays a higher percentage of the reps against the Vikings in these live practices, or whatever it might mean.
Yeah, I think the live practice against the Vikings would probably be his chance to cement what he did on Saturday and stake his claim for, more first team work in Minnesota in the second preseason game. But it's hard. I feel like I'm still stuck in this mode of, we've been through this song and dance with Harbaugh and the Gars in past years, but this is not that team. This is not, this is that they're focused on accountability and standards. And again, he's Ledford's guy. And so you could even argue that this is Ledford's opportunity to say, see, I told you so. I told you I had the guy that you needed. And vault him into a higher spot. So, whether or not he gets the official start, I think would say some. I even think, does he get any snaps with, the rest of the extended first team, so to speak?
Okay, it could occur. I've got to imagine. I think of the Vince McMahon strutting out meme. In terms of you see, that's what Ledford must look like around the building. On Monday. About when they walk out of the film room. He's all happy with himself about the thing. But anyway, great player to bring along with him from Atlanta. A couple of things other about the offensive line I did want to just mention really quickly. I thought they did a good job of leveraging their big advantage in snap count. They really played a lot better as the game went on. And since it was a lot of the same players who were having to get 80 snaps in, even though they're alternating some, you still play a number of snaps in a row. The Ravens had basically all long drives. By the way, here's one of the really amazing statistics. Before the last drive of the game, where they had one first down, then they nailed it out, they had at least 2 first downs on every single drive the whole game. They had 31 first downs in total. They led 30-2 in first downs with 5 minutes to play. I saw that on the scoreboard. I was too slow to get a picture of it, but I would have loved to post that. Anyway,
that's like John Harbaugh level preseason dominance, right?
All of this was the kind of defensive depth that the Ravens have used very regularly to win preseason games. So they had a little bit of offensive depth to go with it too in this one. All right, we'll get into some other coaching things in a little bit. That'll do it for the offensive line. Let's move on a little bit. The running backs, not an unusual difference in expectation of workload. Randall had 36 of the snaps, 12 carries, 2 targets. Toliver 20 snaps, 10 carries, 2 targets, and McMillan 24 snaps and 9 carries. Pretty much everybody got their chance to tote the rock. They worked through the game with 3 guys, and they got Randall a really nice run of play.
Yeah, I was expecting, honestly, maybe a little bit more from Randall, both in terms of his usage and how he performed. I know he had the most snaps in the receiver room, but still only the 12 carries. So was just a little underwhelming from him. But against the preseason, it's really not much to write home about. It's a guy who's probably really not going to do a whole lot this year as a rookie, truth be told.
Yeah, we've seen him in camp, and he's been one of the really impressive players. He's showed great burst and actually some really unexpected cutting ability that I thought was at a higher level. He's not Keaton Mitchell as a cutter, but he's a guy who can distinctly make a one cut, no, he's gone already kind of thing. There's also, he's built like Derrick Henry. He's a big, high cut, muscular back, and nobody's built entirely like Derrick Henry, but if you're built like a mini Derrick Henry, that's a good thing. And other defensive players don't want to get in front of him in level 2. It could be a season-ending problem for them if they do. So anyway, I thought he'd look great in camp. The one play where I thought he did really look in this game was on the 4-yard touchdown run. He really broke 2 tackles at the 4-yard line to get into the end zone. All right, let's move on. We'll talk about any other players you'd like to. Now we've got a few minutes here. We're going to talk about some other things about coaching and the mailbag and whatnot. But bring up a player that you'd like to talk about. Maybe we haven't hit on so far. That was like, I really like this about him.
We didn't talk about Lane actually that much in the first half, and I think the thing that has really impressed me about him is his translation from highlight plays in camp. Pads come on, and it was interesting. Even Lamar Jackson said this at the Ravens stadium practice at the University of Maryland. He said, look, Lane's looked great. It's been nice to make these catches. Let's see how he looks with pads come on. And he really reserved his judgment and his praise until Lane had the pads on. And the pads come on. Lane's been quite good in pads at training camp. And I've been very impressed with his ability to play through contact, his play strength. And we saw that on the touchdown with him fighting through these tackles and using his length to extend into the end zone. I think one of my concerns about him coming in was he's kind of looks like a rail thin guy, and you worry about his ability to operate over the middle of the field in the NFL. There were some catches early in training camp where I had in my notes, yes, that's a great catch over the middle. Malachi Starks and or Kyle Hamilton was winding up to put you in the hospital if that's a live rep.
Yeah.
And the fact that we saw him do this, a couple different ways over the middle, playing through contact on Saturday night, I thought was a really encouraging sign of his ability to keep just stacking days and adding to his game.
This was the very first game where he was putting himself at risk with his enormous catch radius. And he did reach back for one ball, did a good job with that. But the crossing play at the goal line was a case of he needed to make the catch in stride. It was a perfectly thrown ball. Tez Walker would love to have a few more of those balls, frankly, and he caught it at the right height and muscled his way into the end zone. I thought we saw some, you realize how big he is relative to most of the defenders who are going to try and tackle him, and it's even though he's a little bit thin, he's still fairly effective at being too big for those guys.
Yeah, so that was one thing I was just worried about when you get to the excitement of a guy who's making all these spectacular catches. Is he going to be able to hold up doing more than just these sideline grabs? And we started to see him do that in training camp. He's been active in multiple areas of the field, but to me, it's operating over the middle of the field potentially as a power slot with his athleticism.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a lot that you can unlock in his game if he can operate in that area.
Yeah, I think the notion that he kind of replaces part of your flex tight end room was something I really liked. And I liked it all that much more with the tight ends dramatically underperforming so far in camp. Hibner unlocked a lot of value and unlocked some, frankly, some trust with the great game he had. I'd like to see Lane used over the middle more, and see how that works out. He's, obviously he was in situations in college where he used his catch radius. That's a lot of his highlights from college are him, in fairly tight contested situations going up and getting the football. He didn't get himself into trouble with injuries there. So it's probably a good thing in terms of him being able to manage that when there's live hitting going on. All right, I'll bring up a player. We didn't completely talk about the other two wide receivers, but I will say Walker, we've already talked about probably a little bit more in terms of him running complementary routes, and it'd be nice if he got better positions on the football. Surratt, I think, really distinguished himself as being a guy who could go down to get the football in this game, and that was something I really appreciated about him. Good game in general. Didn't have a ton of yak. For most of his catches, he had a couple good yak plays, one on the left sideline, one on that he ended up fumbling on. But most of the other plays, he was actually going down or coming back for the football in a way that he had to kind of box out a low catch point. And I thought Fagnano did a good job of getting him the football.
Yeah, he was slippery at the top of his routes. I thought he had some good nuance in there. A guy who is not an elite athlete is going to have to learn how to shake defenders in different ways. And there was one route that I can't remember who it was highlighted on social media, but just showed him slipping by his guy, little head fake at the top of the route, and just does enough to get open. I felt like that's a lot of what I saw in his college film, was a guy who does enough to get open. And if he's mostly open with his abilities at the catch point, he is open. And so just good for him, especially after a quiet camp and a lot of attention on Lane, the guy who went right after him in the draft, and kind of, I personally felt like Surratt had a bit of a stronger spring, especially finding soft zones underneath in zone coverage, and was, not entirely sure about his ability to separate against man, but we saw a few good examples of that on Saturday night.
Agree completely. All right. So I've got one other player I want to bring up. If you had another one first, though, you can go. Well, let's talk a little bit about Joe Fagnano before we move on completely, because great game for him. 22 out of 28, I believe, as a passer. Completely unexpected, frankly. His accuracy really surprised me on the upside. He throws a very nice straight ball, and he's quite accurate. I know that in the past we've heard Harbaugh talk about, and this is really where it gets into coach speak. Minter does coach speak too. We don't have to just pretend like Harbaugh was horrible and Minter was great about everything. All NFL coaches do coach speak. You have to try and separate out when they're talking at that volume of 2 of coach speak for every player, and when they ramp it up to a 3 or a 4, where they're going over the top to talk about a player. I think that actually understanding that nuance is important, and a lot of times you have to be there live, or at least look at the recordings of those interviews to really understand what they're trying to get at. Anyway, pinpoint accuracy is something that's been ascribed to a lot of quarterbacks that did not deserve it in NFL preseason games. But I thought not only was he very accurate, but he did a really good job of standing in there against pressure and getting the ball off despite it. And that led to some really additional yards of value from that.
Yeah, and you had the one interception. I thought it was really funny that after the game, Jesse Minter said that he liked the throw that Fagnano made on that interception, which just to quickly recall that, he was rolling right on second down in the red zone and threw across his body to the back of the end zone. Not really, and Fagnano admitted this in the locker room after the game, that that's a ball he should have chucked out of bounds. But you mentioned the coach speak. I just thought it was really interesting. Jesse was like, no, actually, I like that pass. I like that intercept. It was a good pass. And really funny from especially, a defensive coach. Of course you liked a bad pass from a quarterback. But yeah, just, maybe blown away is maybe too aggressive. I don't know. I just think the whole impact of Skylar Thompson's injury and asking this guy to come in and play a lot of snaps. And I believe I mentioned this in the first part, so I won't harp on it too much here. But in the preseason, it's about showcasing. It's about giving guys opportunities. And as a quarterback, you are the start of that for all of the pass catchers. And we've seen in past preseasons where the Ravens have not had competent second and third quarterbacks in their preseason games and how adversely that affects the opportunity set for the pass catchers who are trying to shine, trying to carve out roles, trying to make the roster. Fagnano, he did, beyond winning the game and carrying the stats, he does a really big service to the team in terms of building this roster on Saturday night, in terms of just getting people targets and getting them opportunities to make plays, because this is something that the Ravens have struggled with in past years, where the quarterbacks in the preseason are just throwing the ball all over the place. And you don't really know what to make of the wide receivers because they're not getting targets. They're not getting catchable balls. And so it's hard to even evaluate what they can do at the catch point or after the catch because that part doesn't exist. So, credit to Fagnano just so much across the board, commanding the offense, mounting these long drives, right? This is like, you're out on the field, you're away from the sidelines for, 10 plus minutes at a time when you're mounting this long drive up and down the field. And you've got Doyle on the sideline, but you can't go down and after after your series is over, go look at the tablet and go over the film like you can after a series or, after you finish your reps at practice. There's a lot that goes into that. And for a preseason undrafted rookie quarterback, good amount of pressure that comes with that situation. And I probably, we should, I know we're going to talk about it in a second, but this is probably one of the ways the Ravens coaching staff really showed up, is helping Fagnano be ready and being able to stay even keeled and not feel like he was under too much pressure to do what he did on Saturday night.
I'll be honest, this summer is stacked. Between that one big international soccer tournament, America's 250th anniversary, and the Route 66 Centennial, people are going to be traveling. What a lot of folks don't realize is that taking a trip in an RV is a whole heck of a lot more enjoyable than TSA lines or stodgy hotels. And you don't even have to own an RV or drive one to take part. With Outdoorsy, you can rent an RV or camper almost anywhere in the country. You can drive it, tow it, or have it delivered and set up for you. And these aren't bare-bones setups. Many come with full kitchens, bathrooms, showers, and real beds. It's often more affordable than hotels, especially for families or groups. And everything includes insurance, 24/7 support, and roadside assistance. If you're thinking about a summer trip or just planning ahead for the rest of 2026, get 10% off when you book using promo code OUTDOORSY2026. Head to OutDoorsy.com. That's OutDoorsy.com, promo code OUTDOORSY2026.
What if the vacation you thought you couldn't afford is already paid for? That's exactly what Point.me helps you discover. First, if you have credit card points, stop wasting them in your card's travel portal. Point.me searches 150 plus airlines and loyalty programs to help you book flights with far fewer points. It even shows you step-by-step how to book, making award travel simple whether you're a points expert or just getting started. With Point.me, you'll spend up to 90% fewer points on your flights. That flight you thought would cost 100,000 points could be just 10,000 with Point.me. Visit Point.me, that's POINT.me today, and see where your points can really take you. Point.me, turn your points into the trip you thought you couldn't afford.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fairly simple playbook he was working for, a lot of rollout plays, a lot of, I would say fairly simple combination things they run all the time. But he's a guy who hardly had any camp snaps coming into this game. I mean, he's played for about a week since Skylar Thompson's injury. That's about it. And even then, he's been the number 3 guy, which means he's getting the fewest reps of anybody. They did do a few more of those reps in the week leading up to the game because they allowed them to have some longer drives. Still remarkable, I thought, the what he put together. Let's go to what you're talking about though next, which is what imprints did the Ravens coaches have on this game, and how about we just each bring up one at a time until we're out. I don't know. Hopefully, it won't take another half hour, but we'll go through. It will take a while, but start us off.
So I'll go with wide receiver coach Kiri Colbert. The approach that the Ravens receivers had in this game, I didn't actually put away the stats, but I didn't see exactly what their catch rates were. But it felt like every ball that was catchable was caught by the Ravens receivers. I didn't actually pay too much attention to their run blocking, but that is going to be a big part of some of these guys getting on the field. Really, to me, I think that the young receivers really knowing what their roles are, knowing where they're supposed to be on the field at any given time. And I know that applies to pretty much going to apply to every coach. That is a key part of their job. But Lane and Surratt and Walker just never looked out of place. And I think at times they're, these receivers who impress in training camp and you're expecting to get a lot out of them. And then they come in the game, a real game, and they get completely stymied against real competition. You just didn't see that. You saw these guys rise to the occasion. You get the sense that they know what's at stake. This is the foundation of your career that you're starting on your rookie contract with the Ravens. And so whatever you're able to carve out right now is where you're able to grow from. Because we've seen so many receivers who struggle to get off the landing pad here in Baltimore, and their career just never goes anywhere, Baltimore or anywhere else.
I might peg that to Jesse Minter as well. That he's had some comments about lean into the opportunity, and this is the chance, and you have an opportunity until you don't in the National Football League. Is one of the other things I think Weaver might have said. But the coaching staff has been very good, I think, about conveying that message in general. And one of the things that really plays out is the relatability of this coaching staff. There are a lot of older guys, and it's not there are no older guys on this team. Ledford's one of the loudest human beings you'll ever, be in the general vicinity of. Yeah, this because he's absolutely screams at the podium when he's talking to you. But even when you're inside and watching a practice, as we've had a couple times because of rain, you hear him get very loud. But anyway. Most of the guys are very relatable, and it tends to be good when the coaches are younger, but there are relatable older coaches. I think Ledford is one. I think Anthony Weaver is one, being a guy who's a little bit older, who's still extremely relatable to the players. And I think they have gotten the point across in no uncertain terms that it's very important to play well when the lights are on here, because the lights aren't going to be on forever for you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'll come up with another one. Let's talk a little bit about Ledford's imprint on this game, because I think it is multifaceted. They do seem like it's a very physical line, and just the first to second series thing with Ioane that I already talked about was to my mind, a very direct impact of that. The echo of the whistle stuff, one from Posick. We had others from Gwyn in terms of the pancakes. Carson Vincent is a highly technical left tackle. I don't think of him as being a pancake guy. He had a couple in this game. So, you had just a lot of physicality being played with. Ioane on that second drive came out and he was breathing fire in terms of what he wanted to do. So great to see some of that. And, I think it matches. There are other things about, the zone play of this team. We didn't see very many pull blocks in this game. And you don't see a lot of pull blocks when you're running mostly zone, because that's obviously you're kind of everybody's on the move, if you will. But they run it kind of slow sometimes. They run it kind of faster sometimes. They seem like they really wanted to lean into try and get a lot of value out of the boots in these games with Ledford. But the imprint is there. I think if I was just talking qualitatively, though, the physicality was the biggest thing from this game.
Yeah, I felt like the interior did a pretty good job of picking up and passing off some of the stunts, and with the Eagles through. Again, nothing too exotic, nothing too crazy, but just that baseline level of keeping your head on a swivel. Ioane looking for work, not just on that one play, but he was looking for work consistently if he wasn't engaged, which has been an issue with guard play in the past. And so you just look at that interior trio and the cohesiveness of the various interior trios that were on the field. Obviously, they were doing their best when it was Gwyn in there at center, but really just felt like they had just kept their heads on a swivel, did a good job of picking up and passing off guys. I noted that a couple of times, and I noted that a couple of times live. And I feel like when you note that a couple of times live, that shows guys are really on top of it.
Yeah, I did feel like the Eagles did an awful lot to try and confuse the Ravens offensive line, particularly early on. They did a lot of stunts and twists, and they were really probing against the Ravens more than I would normally expect in a preseason game. The Ravens ran 6 stunts in this game, and the Eagles, I would be not surprised if they ran 15. So it was a lot more. There were a lot more pass plays. It could have even been higher than that. Anyway, I big difference in the way the two went. You have another coach you want to go to?
Yeah, but we talked about Fagnano a good bit. So Israel Wolfork, I think, quarterbacks coach, certainly deserves a shout out here. As talked about coming in, and quarterback coach in Baltimore, your job is to work with Lamar Jackson. And when Wolfork was at the podium this week, last week, he was talking about Jackson mostly. But you look at what Fagnano did, and you say, well, that has to come a lot from the quarterback's coach putting in individual time with him and getting him ready for game day, because aren't a lot of other people in the building who are really that focused on Joe Fagnano, leading up to that game. Wolfork, I just think, did a really good job of getting his mindset right, having him, be in command of the game plan. I'm not like the biggest expert on mechanics and that kind of thing from a quarterback, but obviously those things, Fagnano, we have seen him improve on his accuracy as this year has gone on from the spring to now. And so obviously Wolfork deserves a lot of credit for that as well.
Wolfork is an incredibly impressive presence at the podium. First of all, very, very distinct, to the point, terse. He and Declan Doyle are maybe a little bit similar in that regard. A little bit different styles, and Doyle gives you more of a fully analytic nature. But then Wolfork starts talking about stuff like, turning Lamar into a left-footed quarterback. And what he's talking about there is he's saying Lamar needs to have his left foot forward when he's in the shotgun. And Lamar had typically been a right-footed quarterback. And there's quarterbacks that have been great at either way. And by the way, there's pluses and minuses to being a left-footed quarterback or a right-footed quarterback. But left-footed quarterbacks, one thing they do is they mess with the outside corners a little bit more, because outside corners typically pick up on right-footed play because the steps look different in terms of whether they want to make a quick timing throw or whether they're waiting for a full drop back. And that was it. He didn't explain that. I actually had to look it up separately because I didn't even know that they were trying to make this change with Lamar specifically. But it was a very interesting comment, and Wolfork's explanation of things is just very good. And I'm thoroughly impressed by him as a coach. All right, let me move on. I'll give you one more. I thought Mike Mickens. This was a great first game for him, and probably it's be interesting to see. I'd love to be on the headset someday. I'd love to be on the headset for a lot of reasons. Just to hear the chatter going on. But
throw some play calls in there too.
I don't need to do that. I don't even need to call a couple fourth downs for them, which would probably be the area where actually might have just about enough experience to be dangerous. But in the PJ Volker is the safeties coach, and he's up in the booth. And Mickens, I'm not sure where he is. I'm not sure if he's at field level or if he's up in the booth. But they have the eyes working on the field there. The number of busted coverages in the entire game was at a level where you'd have to be very, very happy. Every third down, basically, they didn't get a really great look. The Ravens didn't do a great job with pressure either. So a lot of this is the secondary playing really well in the game. And it's very impressive how they were able to shut the Eagles down in this game. And the Eagles, they trotted out a group of quarterbacks who are not terrible. Having Andy Dalton as your starting quarterback in a preseason game is pretty good. Having your second quarterback be McKee is pretty good. Having your third quarterback, which is really the fourth quarterback on your team, be Cole Payton is pretty good.
Yeah, Mickens was probably my favorite defensive hire of the new coaching staff. Just really incredible pedigree, really, really solid stint at Notre Dame. The quality of the prospects coming out. Xavier Watts coming out of that program last year, being so phenomenal as a rookie in Atlanta. And so that spoke a lot. And obviously all the praise that Kyle Hamilton had for him when he was hired, kind of let you know who you were going to be. who he's going to be. But yeah, just really, again, cohesive. Everyone knew where they're supposed to be. There's such an emphasis on communication. And every coach, every secondary coach emphasizes communication, right? There's follow through in this secondary. You could see it on the field, and you could see them communicating back and forth from one end of the secondary to the other as the offense moved around. So really, really excellent job from him.
I do want to point out that the one blown coverage there was in the game was actually Oruwariye when he was playing safety at the end of the game. And they threw the touchdown in the back corner of the end zone. That's Oruwariye's guy all the way. And he kind of got caught in no man's land where he should have. But he's also playing out of position. And it's not in a position where you're going to expect him during the regular season on anything but the most weird emergency basis, because he's probably not on the roster to start with. But they brought him into the game earlier at corner, which is his normal position, than he would have otherwise gone. Actually sacrificed some snaps, I thought, from Marquise Robinson because of that, who should be ahead of him on the depth chart. But they brought him in early because they had to put him in a safety because Jacquez Robinson was out, and they didn't have a safety to pair up with Silas Walters. As it was, they played Kayvon Wallace and Kendry Jackson all the way till the end of 3 quarters, which was too long, and then they put in the number threes effectively, and it's Oruwariye and Walters, and he's just in a bad spot on that play. Everything basically that happened during that game, otherwise from a secondary basis, was absolutely great. I would say a very, very high level, and I'm thrilled about
it. Agreed. Mickens, Volker, also a guy I was really excited about. Like absolute whiz with that Navy defense. For my last coach, at the risk of opening a can of worms, that I want to highlight is Randy Brown, actually. Because Loop had that first miss, and I keep mixing up what his misses and what his makes were. But he had the one miss. He had one miss early on, came back and made his second. Rookie punter Ryan Eckley shanked his first punt, came back with a much better second punt. Really liked the hang time on that second punt, which was something that was somewhat of a weakness of his coming out of college. The Ravens have put their special teams, or at least their specialist, their kicking and punting eggs, firmly in Randy Jones' basket. Yeah, they're not going to sign, it seems like, any competition for Loop at this point. It's never really felt like they were going to do that, even though I felt like they should have done that from the beginning to bring in some veteran competition. That's not happening. And you got a rookie punter, first-time holder, and Ryan Eckley, and you're having to relearn the operation for a second year in a row. This is pressure for Randy Brown. This is in some ways he's the guy who wanted Loop and insisted they draft Loop. He not insisted, but he's the guy who picked out Loop as this team's next kicker. He picked out Eckley as this team's next punter. It took 3 years for Jordan Stout to really become the guy he was supposed to be in Baltimore. And so, that it's maybe the biggest question mark facing this team outside of who's starting at center is this specialist situation.
Yeah, I'm not concerned. I'm officially not concerned about the kicking situation, but I might be concerned about the holding situation. I'm not sure. If you look at the 49 miss, it was wide right, but the end over end rotation on the ball was perfect. It wasn't, he shouldn't be attempting to, he has some natural hook to his kicks when he misses. Okay. It's funny because, the kick he missed at Pittsburgh at the end of last year, he did basically the exact same thing he did on this first kick here. I'm not sure whether that was him or Eckley who that's on. I tried to look at it a couple of times to see if the ball had been placed a little bit inside. I just could not tell. It did look like there was maybe a little bit of difficulty handling the snap initially. It did get down. It was in the normal position. The ball, rotated properly. So it might be something that he should have been able to adjust to anyway. But we also heard Justin Tucker and Stout talk about the need to get the ball down on an area the size of a grain of rice. And so that's not something I'd be able to tell from that. But I'd love to hear it from Randy Brown or from either these guys maybe at the podium sometime. Is what went wrong on that kick? Can you just take us through that? And I think we get an honest answer on it. And what was nice about it is it still had the right rotation on the ball. And he came back and he made all his other kicks. So I was fine with that. Eckley, the hang time has been an issue in his college career, even when he had fantastic punting numbers. So we'll see if that recovers or anything. I'm not concerned about him as a holder yet, but this is a data point. I got to be honest.
Yeah, and you talk about imprints on the roster. It popped into my head. Imprints on the roster. Randy Brown, that's an imprint on the roster, and the Ravens are really betting on him to get this right.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair to Randy Brown's been a kicking coach forever. He's one of the most respected in the entire National Football League, and he's the guy who runs most of the kicking and punting camps that are out there. And he's basically creates the Ravens having this pipeline of the best guys, which is why all of these Ravens kickers who were number twos to Tucker over the years went other places and kicked really well. And, Gano and Lutz and Hauschka and Ashka is actually the number one kicker here for a very brief time. All these guys went off and became good kickers. So it's also, frankly, the reason why the Ravens were absolutely able to pull the ultimate shyster move on the Vikings and trade them Kari Vedvik for a 5th-round pick because of Randy Brown's reputation as of picking kickers.
Yeah, this is not to. Sorry, I probably sounded like I was casting too much doubt on him. I'm just saying this is they're really betting on him to come through with these two guys, and so there are questions about Loop. I think those questions about Loop are still present. Eckley is a rookie. I really liked how he's been punting in practice. I will say what we've gotten to see. So,
and he had made at least 20 consecutive field goals at camp before he missed this one under the lights, which was really a shame. So,
but that's not necessarily something Brown can correct for. That's going to be up to the young man himself to perform under the brightest of the lights.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, let's move on. We got a couple of mailbag questions I want to get to, and these are fairly short. The first one is from Matt Ruff. Matt, thanks again. Matt's a frequent guest of the show. And one of the people I really enjoy talking football to, but he says, is there any trade value to Broderick Washington at this point?
I think so. I think a guy who's got experience and he's got good tape. It's just the tough part is not a lot of that good tape is last year or even in 2024. Really, he's a couple years removed from his best season. His best work was with his current defensive coordinator as his defensive line coach. The money isn't too much of an issue in terms of a team trading for it. I just wonder about the inside politics of getting a guy to accept a pay cut and then trading him. I know football is a business, but there are also conversations that usually come along with a guy accepting a pay cut about him making the roster. And so I would kind of wonder how much that would be under consideration for the Ravens, especially with Weaver back in the fold now, who Washington played his best ball under and earned that extension under in the first place. So that's why I'm a little dubious about Washington getting traded. I think he has trade value, but I think, taking a pay cut usually almost always involves some kind of a conversation with the team about what the role is going to be. And that can create a little bit of a tough point for trying to get trade him out of there if you've already made a commitment there. Again, it's football, it's a business, teams can do what they want, but there's a way people like to operate.
I'll just say that I don't think that would be an issue at all in this case. And I think, in fact, the guaranteed money itself is the only stake in the ground the Ravens need to make in terms of making a promise to Broderick Washington. It doesn't have to come at all with a promise of a roster spot. It says, hey, Broderick, look, we'll set your salary at $2 million. We'll give you $750 guaranteed. If we cut you, and it might happen, we got young guys we like too, then you might be out of a job looking on the street, but at least you'll have $750,000 towards your salary. Other alternative is we can cut your net right now, save $4 million against the cap, and you can take your chances on the market. Would you like that deal? And I think that's the conversation that should have happened. Whether or not it did or not, it's the conversation that should have happened. So I'm not too concerned about it. We could talk, about Minter and other. I'm sorry, we're past that. But anyway, that's the trade value of Broderick Washington. I think it would be a 7th or a conditional 7th were it to occur, and it's just basically offloading the vet guaranteed minimum component of his salary for the rest of the season to another team. And there are teams that may be short on talent and would be perfectly happy to have Broderick Washington. By the way, Broderick did not have a bad game this week at all. The Willie Lampkin thing, it was bad, but it didn't really impact the play at all. But he actually made consecutive run stops early on in the game that I thought were good. So I think he's got value. It won't be much, but the Ravens, they're all they would be looking for is unload the $1.25 million of salary. All right, got one other question. This is a little longer, but it's interesting. And this is from Sims Robbed LJ of MV3 on Twitter. He says, I know as fans we tend to overvalue our guys, but with our luck with vet offensive tackles, do you think we should realistically think about keeping Lichtenhand on the 53 as OL9? This is assuming Stanley, Rosengarten, Venga, Simpson, Vincent, Jones, Pinter, Gwyn, or is he still far away? So basically, the name that's missing from this that I think is likely to make the roster, actually, there might be a couple of things here. He doesn't have Posick on here. He instead has Gwyn, and that's fine. If you think Gwyn over Posick, that's fine. But the other guy he doesn't have on here is Voorhees, and the Ravens would kind of be a guard short if they didn't have Voorhees on the roster. They've got to, at least I would think, have a player like Bullock on the roster to take that spot.
It's just tough because Jones just isn't – Emory Jones just isn't getting looks at right tackle. Mm-hmm. And Vincent is a natural left tackle. It's like never played right tackle, I don't think. Maybe it's the first time this week we saw him there a couple of times. So, just based on that alone, Lichtenhand has a case. If you're going to carry 10 offensive linemen, I think he's probably the 10th. I haven't watched him that closely. You spent a lot of time grading him. Ken, what do you think about him long term? Do you think there's potential there, or is it really just this is a guy who can play right tackle for us in a pinch?
I think play right tackle in a pinch, probably as I would see it now. By the end of training camp, I might feel a little bit differently. I don't see a ton of developmental upside. I do see him as a top of practice squad guy. I don't think he has the kind of the guy who had a lot of poaching risk when they caught him years ago and he ended up getting taken was Sanat. I don't think there's a guy. I don't think he's a guy that gets taken. But you look at the left guys who can play left tackle in particular. The left tackle build and a little bit of feet that go with it, like Sanat, even like Sharp. Those are guys who could end up playing for a lot of NFL teams and sometimes be traded for a conditional sixth instead of a conditional seventh. Because they left tackle has value that's way north of that. Lichtenhand's a right tackle only. I don't really see him as a huge, obvious, poach by some other team.
Yeah. So then, I'm always would prefer to just drop him to the practice squad. And like I think you mentioned this in the first part of the show is, Emory Jones has started for 3 years in the SEC at right tackle. Did it when he was 19 years old. If you need him to play 20 snaps to close out a game at right tackle, he knows how to do that. And so you risk that and you bring Lichtenhand up the next week. I still think that's the approach I would take, especially, as we made our little bet on the first show with the possibility this year, I would say certainly more than other years to take 26 defenders. That would mean 9 offensive linemen. And if you're thinking about 1-for-1 comparisons, and I know that's not the only thing that goes into the decision, but just to frame it that way, 1-for-1 comparisons about a defensive tackle, a Rayshon Benny or whoever that may be over Lichtenhand, it's pretty clear you're keeping Benny, especially he's got the draft pick contract value attached to it. So
yeah, I'm with you. All right. Great discussion here. Really appreciate it. Oh, one thing we haven't done is the offensive MVPs. Let's do that. 3, 2, 1. We won't have too much discussion because I think we've hit on these all as we went. But who's your number 3 guy?
Yeah, I'm a little worried that we're going to end up having the same 3. So I think I'm going to go ahead and give Lichtenhand number 3, just to diversify it a little bit. As I've mentioned a couple times, just credit to him for, the Ravens have their veteran right tackle retire, who's probably supposed to come in and play roughly half this game for them on Saturday night. He retires abruptly. And Lichtenhand, with Emory Jones on the roster because they want to get Jones more work at guard, Lichtenhand comes in, plays the entire game at right tackle. I thought acquits himself quite well. Can't remember if I made this point on the first or second part of this podcast, so I'll make it here again. In practice, and you're practicing for stretches at a time. We only saw last week a couple of longer drives where players were out on the field for a longer period of time. So they have a full practice period, obviously the whole afternoon, but it's not the same as playing a 6 to 8 minute drive in terms of game time on the NFL field. and is much less doing that on a number of long drives that the Ravens mounted throughout the game, largely because of Lichtenhand's ability to hold firm on that at that right tackle spot. So a lot of credit to him for going in and playing 80 snaps and looking pretty good while doing it.
I think that point was made by Weaver, right? He talked about players aren't always ready to play a lot of snaps in a row, but even just 10 snaps in a row from a long drive, and the Ravens had a couple 10-play drives in this game, is more than Lichtenhand has probably played the entire summer or at any point with the Ravens, other than maybe in a preseason game last year. So it's a difficult stretch, and that doesn't even begin to talk about playing 80 snaps in a game and the effort that would take. Anyway, I'll move on. My number 3 guy is Matt Hibner. Outstanding, and I thought a big jump up from his play at camp. We've talked about it already. I don't think I need to go into it much more.
Yeah, 100%. Think it was really exciting to get him to flash that athleticism. Just really nice for a guy who that's a part of his skill set. He hasn't gotten the opportunities to do that in camp. It's been frustrating at times to watch how he's been used at camp. So that wheel route up the sideline was that was real nice.
Thing of beauty. All right.
For my number 2. So I was kind of torn. I think we're gonna have the same 2 and 1. I don't think there's really any way around that. I'm going to say most valuable player, number 2 on Saturday night, was Jovaughn Gwyn. Now, just for Saturday night, I'm saying he could be the most valuable player when you think about what that impact of his play on Saturday night could have the long term for the year. But purely on Saturday night, not really much else to say other than, man, what a little spark. Not little seems such a horrible way to describe a fierce defensive lineman. What a massive fiery spark plug in the middle of that offensive line. Speed off the ball, physicality through the whistle. You mentioned, Dwayne Ledford walking around like, Vince McMahon, really strutting his stuff and saying, look, I told you, I have the starting center in Atlanta, brought him up here to Baltimore with me, and I present him to you on a silver platter against what is a well-coached and pretty talented Eagles defensive line, even with their depth.
Right. Yeah, they definitely have, still very good size there to work with. And Gwyn is my number 1 guy. Loved him in terms of what he did. And I am projecting a little bit in terms of how significant this thing is for the Ravens, because I think it's fair to say my number 2 guy outplayed him for the game, given what he did. But my number 2 guy is Fagnano. And it sounds like he's probably your number 1. Fantastic game, way above expectations. Still is the Ravens' number 3 quarterback. I don't think he displaces Huntley. What that would take. I mean, they've signed Huntley. They signed him for 2 years now, right? Also, or they just signed for 1? Yeah. So I mean, they're a 2-year deal. Yeah, they're not backing out of that.
No way.
Yeah.
No, 0% chance of that. It's going to be really interesting how he does against Minnesota and how aggressive Brian Flores gets against him and how he responds to that. Puts up another really good performance, maybe a third against Washington. Maybe you get a little worried about someone poaching him. But again, a guy who goes undrafted, relatively meager signing bonus, no guarantees otherwise. You usually feel pretty safe about sneaking onto the practice squad. The problem with doing that, though, is in the regular season, you kind of got to keep your head on a swivel in case other teams' quarterback injuries crop up. And you think like, oh, I definitely want to keep this guy. You might have to clear a spot on the 53 to promote him and kind of juggle things from there. But he is my MVP for the game, I think, just purely in terms of who was most responsible for the Ravens winning that game. I think it was Joe Fagnano. And seeing him in the locker room after the game, just very humble, down to earth. I did my job. Let's get out of here and go home. I really just loved a lot of, you talked about the accuracy, staying in the face of pressure, making some throws on the move. But so much of the quarterback position, as we know, Ken, is mental. And Fagnano being able to come in and handle as much as he did in his first game, and do it with a lot of poise on relatively short notice for getting that level of a workload, similar to Lichtenhand, but I would say more demanding in terms of what he was asked to do mentally, running the offense, and running the offense exceptionally smoothly. I was so impressed with the pre-snap operation, how clean things were, the lack of penalties. I know it's something the Ravens were really excited about. Again, it's the preseason. They do simplify things. It's not, super crazy play calls or anything like that. But again, this is an undrafted quarterback out of UConn that we're talking about in Baltimore. and it hasn't been a strong suit for them. So it's really great to see, another Joe F. quarterback succeed in Baltimore.
All right. So we're in agreement on effectively the list here. I had some honorable mentions. I won't bother with that. Nick, always great to talk football with you. And I thought we had a lot of fun going through this and talked about some interesting points that I can't have this conversation with just anybody about coaching imprints and things like that. So I appreciate you coming on. Tell folks where they can talk to you online.
Well, you're too kind, Ken. This is always such a pleasure and a learning experience for me, really. Is one of the reasons why I enjoy it so much. It gives me new avenues, new things to think about. You can find my written work for the Ravens on BaltimoreBeatdown.com. Going to have a lot of coverage of the training camp, end of training camp, and going into the season on there. And then you can find me on Twitter, or X as it's called now, at Nik Nik Knows Ball.
All right. Outstanding. Folks out there, we appreciate you so much listening. If you're still listening at the end of a 2-hour, second part of a 2-hour podcast, appreciate you that much more. And would ask you, we don't ask for money, generally speaking, but if you want to write us a 50-word review on your favorite podcast platform, that's always nice in terms of driving traffic to the show. Otherwise, use filmstudymailbag@gmail.com for your questions. And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.